Welcome to Hoarding Time. Today, I'm going to review my top 5 favorite cards for survivors from the new Aetherdrift set. There are a lot of good resources out in the community right now that can tell you what some of the best cards are to put in your deck from a moment-to-moment gameplay standpoint, but there are not many that are focused on putting it in the deck in order for other players to take advantage of those cards or for you to help other players out. So, in this review, I'm looking at my top 5 cards for cooperative play. Before I get into the top 5 cards, I do have a few honorable mentions, but those are going to be general honorable mentions. Any card, especially creatures, that grant lifelink, trample, or that grant indestructible are all excellent cards and well worth your time to look at for adding to decks for Horde mode, simply because those are going to help you survive longer, block creatures, and keep them on the board. Let's go ahead and jump into my top 5 cards from Aetherdrift for you to play. The first one is River Churn Monument, which costs 1 and a blue. It is an artifact that says, pay 1 and tap, then any number of target players each mill 2 cards. The advantage of this card is that it is any number of target players mill 2 cards. Oftentimes, you will see mill cards target 1 player or everyone at the table. But this card allows you to say, hey, Horde, you're going to mill 2 cards. Get rid of those. Hey, I'm a mill deck. I'm going to mill 2 cards. Also, maybe someone brought a mill deck or a graveyard-centric deck that needs some mill. Well, now you can target them without forcing everyone to take cards out of their deck and put them in the graveyard. It's a great card that lets you play with your team, hurt the Horde, and enable the players to do what they want to do. However, this card does even more. You can exhaust it for 2 and 2 blue and tap it, and any number of target players each mill cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. You can activate each exhaust ability only once. So what this does is you can take the Horde, if the Horde has all of its cards in the graveyard, you can say, hey, mill that many cards. Well, when you mill that many cards, if there's 100 cards in the graveyard, then the Horde has to mill 100 cards. So you'd shuffle the graveyard and then mill that. You've gone from essentially you've dealt 100 damage to the Horde. So that's really, really strong if you use it at the right time. So it's a fabulous ability. Also, it's very good for players who want a lot of cards in their graveyard to mill if you're doing a mill deck. So it can be very aggressive against the Horde, or it can be very helpful for your team. So it is a really interesting card that when I first saw it, I was like, maybe this isn't going to be the one I pick for blue, but it's so good. It does a lot, and I love graveyard strategies, so this card is something that it will definitely be going into some of my blue decks that I want to deal with the graveyard. The next card is Ancient Vendetta, which costs 3 and a black. It is a sorcery that says, choose a card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them. Then that player shuffles. This is a great card for targeting the Horde Swells cards in the Horde, because you're targeting 4 cards individually with the same name, so you could just say the Horde Swells. You know that the Horde has them, and since there's 10 of them in the Horde deck, that's really reducing the amount that the Horde can swell. Also, if there's a very frustrating card that you know that you just want to get rid of from the Horde, you can do that as well. So it's a great card for giving you more time, especially if you're playing a game where you're fighting a very aggressive Horde. You can at least give yourself a little bit of breathing room. The next card I picked is Full Throttle, which costs 4 generic and 2 red mana. It is a sorcery that says, after this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases. At the beginning of each combat this turn, untap all creatures that attack this turn. Useful, it can be used after your first main phase or your second main phase. Multiple attack steps is always strong. It's expensive, but in Horde mode, you're oftentimes able to cast 6, 7, 8 mana spells, simply because if you're playing with lower powered decks, you're not killing the horde on turn 5 or 6. You're killing the horde around turn 12 is generally what I'm seeing most of my games going to. If your games are going longer or shorter, let me know. I would be curious to see how long games are going for other people and other play groups. But for full throttle, you can easily cast a 6 mana spell, and it does generally, this will be something that will probably close out the game for you or get you very close to closing out the game. The next card is Greenbelt Guardian. It's 1 generic and a green, and it is a creature elf ranger with 2 abilities. The first is pay 1 green mana, target creature gains trample until end of turn. And then you can exhaust the creature to pay 3 generic and a green to put 3 +1/+1 counters on the Greenbelt Guardian. And it has power and toughness 2/2. The exhaust ability is nothing to write home about, but the base ability, the pay 1 green and target creature gains trample until end of turn, is actually very good in horde mode. Because trample lets you block multiple creatures. This can be used at instant speed. It's quite inexpensive. And you can do it, and since it's targeting a creature, not a creature you control, you can have another player who maybe has a bigger creature gain trample to be able to kill more of the horde creatures. And it also gives it early on in the game. You can have trample by turn 3 in a green deck easy. Theoretically, you could even almost have it by turn 1, depending on how your cards play. Probably not by turn 1. But the horde attacks up on turn 3, so you would easily be ready to give a creature trample by turn 3, which can be very helpful in those early game moments of keeping the horde from overwhelming your defenses. The next card is Radiant Lotus. You probably expected this one if you've been paying attention to the reveals for this set and the reviews. It is 6 generic mana, and you can tap it and sacrifice 1 or more artifacts and choose a color. Target player adds 3 mana of the chosen color for each artifact sacrificed this way. This card is incredible. If you have a bunch of treasures, or food, or clue, or blood tokens, junk tokens, you can sacrifice and give target player that mana. This is huge for cooperative play, because what this lets you do is, let's say someone has a big X spell and they can't cast it. Well, now you can give them the mana to really pump it up huge. Or, for example, in many games I've played, someone wants to do something and they just don't quite have enough mana to do it. And I'm sitting there and I've spent either all my mana, or actually I'm sitting there and I have mana unused, or I have treasures unused because I've done everything I can. Well, now Radiant Lotus lets me give the other players mana, which is huge. It's probably too strong of a card, and I bet it's going to be very, very expensive. Pretty much all the Lotuses get very expensive, so don't expect this one to show up in a lot of decks, but it is by far the biggest for cooperative play in the entire set. So if you see it, be very excited. It's an artifact too. It can go in any deck, which is wild. So you can do all sorts of crazy things with it, which is pretty exciting. So that is my number 1 card from the set. Let me know what you've been seeing in Aetherdrift, if you've picked any different cards that you really were excited for in your decks for your cooperative play. There are a bunch of fun robots that I've seen in the set that I'm going to build a horde around, so look forward to that. My next horde should still be an ooze. I know I've been threatening that for a while, but life is busy. So thank you for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, and hold the line, Planeswalkers.